I'm Leo Warder for Kit Guru. This small form factor PC here is DinoPC BullDog BD3. As the name suggests, it's built into Corsair's BullDog bare-bones chassis, which was launched at Computex 2015. Here we are late in 2016, over a year later, and finally BullDog is coming through to market. So quite exciting in the sense it's been over a blooming year since this thing was promised and shown to us. Here it is. Let's just start Gears of War 4 benchmark running. So this is running at 4K with shiny stuff turned on. Specifically, that is ultra settings, so cranked up, and it runs very nicely. I'm not going to give any games away here. The hardware inside this particular BullDog is high-end, so we're talking Skylake, we're talking Mini ITX Asus motherboard, Core i7 6700K, and an Asus GTX 1080 graphics card. As ever, photos on Kit Guru so you can see the close-ups, but the spec of this PC is absolutely top-notch, and as you can see, the result is that you can indeed play games at 4K. Thank goodness for that, if you couldn't, it'd be fairly pointless. As to whether this is intended to be a PC that sits under your TV or whether it's for LAN parties or a bit of both, I'm not personally entirely settled one way or the other. It is relatively noisy. I can hear a constant drone of fresh hot air coming out of the thing. It uses the Corsair H5 SF, small form factor, cooler that we've seen previously, because the cooler was launched a while ago, and it's compact. It's therefore it's flowing air through a relatively small vent, and as a result you can hear the blooming thing. The graphics card in our hand, the Asus GTX 1080 Strix, nice and quiet, but nonetheless it has to shift plenty of hot air. So you put a decent amount of hardware in a relatively small space, albeit this is not a tiny chassis. I mean, but nonetheless, the result is you've got to shift the hot air. The result in this instance is the processor cooler is working relatively hard. It draws 80 to 100 watts on the Windows desktop and 265 to 280 watts in 3D Mark. We finished here, so that's average 48 frames a second and low point 40 frames a second, which for a brand new game at 4K on cranked up ultra settings, pretty darn tooting, I'd say. Time for a closer look inside the chassis. Diving inside the BullDog for a quick look is quite straightforward. You take off this rear bezel, 4 screws and away it comes, 2 screws to release the top. There's a block connector because there are some LEDs in the top panel, and away it comes. And inside you've basically got your power supply, which is SFX. In this instance, DinoPC's used a Corsair SF 600, so 600 watts, and as I mentioned before, draws less than 300 when it's being stressed in 3D Mark and games. So the power supply, even though it's a tiddly little SFX, is actually under stressed. Then we have the cooling system here, which is the H5 SF, as mentioned before, which is one of these things that's quite easy to look at, it's quite easy to remove should I choose to. Installing it, as I discovered myself some months ago, a little bit like hard work. It stands on some sort of legs above the CPU, but it's doable. Building this thing is considerably more complicated than simply looking at it as I am now. So this is one you might choose to upgrade yourself at some point, but unless there's blooming good reason, you shouldn't be fiddling inside it, even though it looks relatively spacious compared to some really compact Mini ITX systems. Over here we've got the hard drive, which is a 2 terabyte Toshiba. And then here we have a caddy for an SSD. 2 screws there, 2 screws there. That comes away with cables, revealing the graphics card as shown in our photos, which is a full-length GTX 1080 from Asus. It's one of their slightly overclocked models that's about 100 megahertz higher, and that's an expensive piece of hardware. Retails for the advanced Asus is £680. They're doing it even faster for 750. GTX 1080 is just monumentally expensive. So under there we have that Core i7 6700K, we've got some Corsair Corsair Vengeance DDR4 3200, 16 gig thereof, and an Asus Z170i Pro Gaming motherboard. The thing actually boots off a 500 gig SAMI SM961 SSD. As I say, I have not pulled this apart because frankly it's a PC and pulling it to pieces would be a bit rude, but I'm fairly certain that that's going to be an M.2 which is on the back of the motherboard on this particular Asus. Obviously if you wanted to put a 2.5 SSD in that caddy, that'd be easy peasy. The M.2 in this instance slightly more tricky to access. So all the components absolutely fine. The BullDog chassis itself in this configuration is relatively noisy. It does chuck out a fair amount of heat and a fair amount of noise. It's not raucous, it's not horrible. It's just louder than I would like for a thing sat under my TV. Then again, GTX 1080, I mean, a lot of heat, so you've got to cool it somehow. And the cooling, temperatures in this system were very acceptable. Idling, CPU idle 24, GPU 32, CPU loaded 67, GPU loaded 74. So for an air-cooled system, that's pretty blooming good. So the noise does have a benefit. Were you to want to go the other way and liquid cool this thing properly, custom loop, it would be an immense amount of work. That's all I'm saying. So overall, DinoPC's built a Corsair heavy system. The gaming power is absolutely superb. The components they've chosen are fine and dandy. The pricing is slightly scary at £2,200, but then if you put that pile of components together, regardless of the chassis, it's going to cost you a bunch of money. And the BullDog system, it's reasonably expensive. I found this chassis bundled with this same motherboard, and that was £390. And the motherboard itself is about 150. So the chassis would appear to be about the 240 quid mark. But you know, that's say you bought a cheaper case, you'd be saving yourself 150. Out of £2,200, 10% tops. As I say, sitting under your TV, I'm not absolutely certain about it. Clearly it will do it. You would probably want headphones, but it is a way to use that lovely 4K TV you've got. On the other hand, the fact you can unplug it and use it as a LAN gaming machine, very, very good idea indeed. Quality of the components, very good. Performance, absolutely top notch. Very pleased I've seen BullDog at last. It's been a heck of a long wait. I'm Leo Walder for Kit Guru. This is DinoPC BullDog BD3. If you like this video, thumbs up. If you don't, thumbs down. If you want to see more from Kit Guru, click to subscribe.